So I want to welcome everybody. My name is Wendy Schiller. I'm professor of political science and director of the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy. And we're really thrilled tonight to have Professor Richard Arenberg and Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro here tonight to talk about all things appropriations and federal dollars. We're really pleased. We know that Congresswoman DeLauro is in the middle of pretty intense negotiations. So we know that if she has to leave, it's going to be for a very good reason. Though we're really going to try to pack as much as we can in while we have her on the line. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Richard Arenberg, who's going to introduce and moderate, and then we'll take turns asking questions.
Well, we're honored to have as our special guest tonight the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, the Honorable Rosa DeLauro. Congresswoman DeLauro represents Connecticut's 3rd Congressional District, which stretches from the Long Island Sound and New Haven to the Naugatuck Valley and Waterbury. In addition to chairing the Appropriations Committee, she serves as the chair of the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education Appropriations Subcommittee, where she oversees our nation's investments in education, health, and employment. Rose is a member of 62 House caucus groups and is the co-chair of the Baby Caucus, the Long Island Sound Caucus, and the Food Safety Caucus. Soon after earning degrees from Marymount College and Columbia University, she followed her parents' footsteps into public service, serving as the first executive director of Emily's List, a national organization dedicated to increasing the number of women in elective office. She was executive director of Countdown 87, the national campaign that successfully stopped U.S. military aid to the Nicaraguan Contras, and as chief of staff to U.S. Senator Christopher Dodd. In 1990, Rosa was elected to the House of Representatives, and she served as the Congresswoman from Connecticut's 3rd Congressional District ever since. Rosa is married to renowned pollster Stanley Greenberg. They have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. Rosa and I are good friends dating back to the 1980s when she served as Senator Dodd's chief of staff, and I was then chief of staff to Senator George Mitchell. Now it's my very great honor to introduce Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro. Welcome to Brown.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. What an honor to be with you, Rich. And I guess at that juncture, you worked with my dear, wonderful friend to this day is Pat Griffin, right, you know, sure. Right. And when I was just a freshman AA, if you will, chief of staff, and he was a seasoned person, and I didn't answer his phone call, quickly enough, and he hung up on me. So I picked him up. I picked up the phone and I reamed him out. You know, that was our getting to know one another. And Wendy, how lovely to be with you. And listen, your history as well is serving with one of the giants again, like George Mitchell in the Senate, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was, I did a lot of work with Liz Moynihan. So
you did? Great. That's great.
Wonderful.
And then Senator Dodd's office was also in Russell, right? Also on the 4th.
Oh, yes.
Russell?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
That was a whole crew. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I always view these folks as the titans. These are folks who understood why they were elected, and they carried out, pushed the institution to the edge of the envelope in order to carry out its mission on behalf of their constituents. So, and I want to just say, I'm delighted to join students and faculty, alumni, members of the Brown community that are all gathered for the virtual conference and conversation tonight. So it's wonderful to be with you. So I would just say to you, and I'll just take a second.
Sure.
This is quite an extraordinary week. Today is the end of the fiscal year, and we just passed within the last hour or so the continuing resolution. It was 254 to 175, and we were able we had 34 Republicans who joined in that effort. I actually thought, and we could deal with that later, that we would have and should have had more Republicans join that effort. But this is, as you all know, the continuing of the federal agencies. It's education, health, housing, public safety, and the programs will go on through December 3rd. That allows us the time to be able to negotiate on the appropriations bills in the House and the Senate, so that we can come to the fiscal year 22 budget. I might say, though, added to this, which is very, very interesting, added to the continuing resolution are two supplementals. One which deals with the disaster funding, about $28.6 billion to deal with wildfires and drought and hurricanes, flooding, etc. And it reaches pretty much through every part of the country, because, and even you think about climate change and what's going on. So this spreads all over the country. And the second piece of this is, with the ending of the war in Afghanistan, what we tried to do is to provide, it's about $6.3 billion to dealing with the resettlement of Afghan evacuees here, in addition to providing humanitarian assistance to people in the region, and particularly focused on women, girls, minority communities. So I'm very, very proud of that effort. And we crafted this bill, I might add, and talk about the happenings in the last week since we first introduced it. But there was a very, very strong, and I have to credit the staff. Staff is unbelievable. That worked in a very strong, bipartisan, bicameral way to get us to craft the bill with all these pieces. Some other things interfered, like the attachment of the debt ceiling at the last minute, the attachment of Iron Dome at the last minute, both very, very important issues. But that forced us to come back again and pass the bill finally, tonight. And debt ceiling is going to be taken up in a different direction. The Iron Dome, we passed a suspension bill in the House with the funding for Iron Dome for Israel, critically important. I believe the Senate will move in the same direction. And if you'll allow me, I'm just going to make one more point to you, because I was elected last December to this position. And you know what? It's great to have the gavel. It's wonderful to have the gavel. I just say this because appropriations sometimes is very opaque. People don't know what it's about. $1.4 trillion goes through these 12 subcommittees. And, people introduce legislation, members introduce legislation all of the time. Sometimes it moves quickly and it happens. Sometimes it's years and years. Look, I introduced men and women in the same job deserve the same pay, equal pay for equal work. I introduced that, in 1997. It still isn't the law of the land. And a whole bunch of other, pieces of legislation that are out there. But appropriations bills have to be passed every single year, or the government shuts down. And sometimes it's not understood that each one of these subcommittees, which mirrors the authorizing committees, is, each one of these is creating public policy every single year, and getting people and even members to understand that is the strength and it's the power of the purse. Sure. And if you take a look at the quotes about the Appropriations Committee, nothing happens without the work of the Appropriations Committee. So I've tried to work very, very hard to have. I found that when I was even running for the position, that members didn't know, and they said to me, Rosa, we don't understand what goes on in appropriation. So I've tried to make it my business, to really work with, do all kinds of meetings with all, various groups in the House, et cetera, to really have people understand its import and the consequences on their districts. Every single year, we make a determination of the number of childcare. It's like we say slots, but it's the number of children who have access to childcare. Job training, how many people will be, have that opportunity. Again, so proud of the committee and the role that we have played, though it's the CR, the continuing resolution, falls directly in the purview of appropriations. The reconciliation process doesn't, but we make our strength felt. Proud of the work that we did with all the COVID pandemic, the CARES packages, the American Rescue Plan. And I think ultimately my goal is to say we have to make the government work for people. And I think we're at a moment where people, for the first time in a very long time, believe that government does play a role in their lives. It's not like get government off your back, with Reagan, but going back to having people understand that, especially in times when the challenges are so great that, and they're overwhelming, and that individuals can't do this by themselves. And I think that's one of the things that was demonstrated in this pandemic. I spoke too long. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Thank you. Thank you for that. By the way, congratulations on the passage of the CR tonight.
Thank you.
I think often many people in the country don't recognize, as you said, just how critical that is. And we've come down really to only hours before the money for the federal government was going to run out. So it's a terrific job getting that through, really just in the nick of time. The ironic thing is it's probably not even the most dramatic thing happening tonight in the House of Representatives.
Colleague David Price said to me yesterday when I was going through what was in this at Jim Clyburn's whip meeting. I talked about CR, what was in it, explained it to members, et cetera, answered questions. David Price of North Carolina, who came to me and he says, "This one seems very simple," and it's right. Threading the needle of getting there was wild.
Right.
And David Price is a political scientist.
Yes, he is.
Plug in for political science.
Absolutely, you should. And that's where I was. And my husband was at the political science department at Yale many years ago.
Yeah.
So, it's the best. It really is. I'm with you.
Well, Wendy mentioned at the outset that there's a possibility we might have to let you go a little early because of all of the drama going on in the House of Representatives right now. What we're talking about really are the negotiations ongoing, really to try to get the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed, the roughly $1 trillion bipartisan bill, and also along with it the roughly $3.5 trillion social program.
This is the problem with the Democratic Party. Congresswoman DeLauro, right? If Rich Arenberg can't describe this $3.5 trillion bill.
No, the $3.5 trillion is about, it is infrastructure. The infrastructure is childcare. We had a childcare industry that just about collapsed during the pandemic. Over 2 million women not opting out of the workforce, pushed out of the workforce. In addition to that, paid family and medical leave. Again, what the pandemic demonstrated was that people who were out of work through no fault of their own had no recourse to wages. If people get sick, children, loved ones, parents, grandparents, no time to spend with their families. Every industrialized country in the world has paid family and medical leave. A child tax credit is in this $3.5 trillion, which I'm enormously proud. Took me 18 years to get the child tax credit in play.
Right.
And I'm fighting like hell, I will tell you, in these days to look at it and to try to make it as permanent as possible, to expand it and to make it permanent, because already it is demonstrated just reducing poverty amongst children and hunger already with just 3 monthly payments. It already has that. But housing is in there. Education is in there. Climate change is in there. That's what's in. So it is infrastructure, and it's not on the soft side. This is, people want to say, what's a caregiving economy? Without these critical pieces, there is no economy.
Yeah.
There is no economy.
And it's the heart of the Biden agenda.
That's it.
That's right.
And it's historic in terms of the lack of a serious investment that we have had over the years in any of these areas. So it is historic.
Much of the drama and the struggle, however, is occurring within the Democratic caucus.
Mm-hmm.
And disagreements, at least at this stage, between the progressive wing and the more moderate wing of the party. And the speaker is going forward, at least as last we know, with a vote tonight on the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Some Democrats in the caucus are steadfastly saying they won't support it. So I'm wondering, how much you can tell us about what the state of the play is right now.
Well, I want to just make a point. There is real unity around with Democrats, the agenda. It is the Build Back Better agenda. It's what the president ran on. It's what the president promised, is what we all support. All of us support that. That's not the issue of, the divergence. And I'll be quite frank with you. We have 2 people in the Senate, 2, that are holding the process up. And so it's not like, that there is a great differences, but 2 people holding this up. You also have the fact that in the House, we have a 3-vote majority. In the Senate, 50-50. So that in and of itself puts a spotlight on differences and divisions. If we were in the last Congress, wouldn't make,
That's right.
It'd be gone. It'd be done. It's done. So that is what it is. And if the speaker would say, we've had more unity around this agenda than we have had in so many other areas of that we have dealt with. And yes, right now in the state of play is the negotiations are ongoing. And at the moment, I don't have a time frame yet, but it could happen at any moment that we would vote, and particularly if there is the framework for this reconciliation package that is there. And there again, you have to look at, and I view this as I just described what's in the package. What is the value of what we're talking about there to the country, to a strong economy, to people getting back to work? And that has to be measured along with people looking at, it's not just the top line, it's not the process, it is about thinking about what is it that we need to try to get done, and then how can we do it? And that's where, you know, we have to focus our attention. And obviously it comes down to where the numbers are and where the money is, and that's going to go back and forth. You know, it went from 6 trillion to 3.5,
Yes.
and there's others who want to make it, you know, lower. But there's also a sense, and I'll finish up with this. There's also a sense that there are probably a whole lot of folks in the Congress who don't want to move forward on these issues
Right.
that are so critically essential to the country. And there is concern about that. You know, it's the old thing, you get what you want and then you take the ball and go home, you know? So yeah, there is concern about that, and it's legitimate. It really is legitimate, you know, especially when you see you can't get, you can't get support on some of these programs on the other side of the aisle. And so there is concern. And I'll be frank, you can't get support from some of the, you know, in terms of the numbers, in terms of, you know, within our own party, people with a different, you know, a different view. But I'm, you know, you never bet against the speaker.
Yes, right.
He has an uncanny ability, you know, to work until you get something done. So we will see what happens. But I also don't believe that it's the end of the line. You know, it might get, you know, nothing.
Yeah.
18 years took me to get to child tax credit. So, you know, if we're talking about, you know, getting things done and waiting until we can come to some agreement, then I think, you know, we're all the better.
Yeah, there's the positive side of the fact that this is going on within the Democratic caucus in the House and the Senate, in that we're talking about Democrats, all of whom want the Biden administration to succeed.
Mhm.
So you would think that negotiations go on in good faith, and that eventually you may find a way to get to yes.
Exactly.
So can I follow up
Sure.
exactly on your point, the very last point you made, which I think is so important, and people don't quite get it, as if some curtain is coming down and then the Congress can't do anything after that. But I did want to ask you specifics. It's not true. We know that's not true. We've seen this. The crime bill failed in December of '93, and then they got it through in '94. You know, they voted against the rule. They got it done. You can get stuff done. So here's my question about transportation and infrastructure, which I think people get confused about. September 30th, we have the expiration, I think, of the reauthorization of the funding. So my question to you as chairwoman of appropriations is, so if it doesn't pass right now, are there actual implications for the flow of money out of the highway, trust fund and other kinds of funding sources for transportation?
Well, I think, you know, there is that talk, and we'll see where that does go, because it's all pending on whether or not we can move to an infrastructure bill tonight. And there probably not, there is, I'm sure, then the conversation about, because that's separate from the appropriations process. That is then what kind of an extension would there be in terms of the surface transportation bill? And so, because with regard to transportation and HUD, that in terms of appropriations will come up in December, before, you know, December 3rd. So, but this piece, you're absolutely right. It's now part of this infrastructure bill. And if the infrastructure bill doesn't occur or doesn't happen, then they will look to see, and there's a bipartisan plan in which to extend the surface transportation bill, and so that we can get something done and not leave that, you know, we can't leave things in, you know, just falling off the cliff. So, look, we've been there before on these things with the FAST Act and so forth and so on. So, you know, there's all kinds of scenarios, you know, so, but I think everyone is committed to making sure that we can move on the surface transportation bill and not let that hang out there.
That's great. So I have a question. We're going to alternate, and basically, we know that our students and the members of the Brown community, would love to hear about. You have such a long and storied career. So we've mentioned that you served as, and I recognize the term AA, Chief of Staff for
Right.
Senator Dodd, and you're an extraordinarily effective member of Congress, but you're also an extraordinarily effective spokeswoman for the core issues of the Democratic Party, and you have been for some time. The way that you characterize this reconciliation package is the most articulate, family-friendly, woman-friendly way that I've heard.
Mhm.
And as a woman, I'd like to ask you, is that because you're a mother and a woman and a politician and you understand how to package this? Because it seems to me the Democrats have the opportunity to be family-friendly here, but somehow this has gotten lost in translation.
Yeah.
So if you could just relate your personal experience career-wise, and also how you manage to be, to formulate how well you characterize the policies in that language that people can understand.
Mhm. Well, thanks so much, Wendy. I have to go back to my own family. I mean, it's not about the 30 years that I've spent in the House of Representatives. First of all, as you all know, and both of you have being in the institution, that the institution doesn't create your values, doesn't. That comes out of, and in my case, being raised in an Italian Catholic household. That's where, with, I might add, in a working family. My mother worked in the old sweatshops in the city of New Haven as a garment worker, on the sewing machine, just pumping out dresses, and, in a place that was dirty and ugly and awful. My dad was an insurance salesman, but both of my parents served in public life. My father served on the city council in New Haven for a short period of time. He had to leave because it wasn't a paying job, and he was trying to get his daughter, his only child, his daughter, to school.
Yes.
My mother served on the city council in New Haven for 35 years.
Wow.
She was the longest serving member of the New Haven Board of Alders, and not just the longest serving woman, the longest serving member in the history of the New Haven. And I will tell you, if she had the opportunity for the education that my folks gave to me, she'd have ruled the world. Tough, fierce. I often describe her as an equal opportunity antagonist to every sitting mayor, Democrat or Republican. But my point is that I grew up in an environment that was working, middle class, blue collar, and I will tell you, my father went bankrupt in a business. We came home one Friday night, and our furniture was out on the street. We had been evicted, and it wasn't because my folks were not working as hard as they could. They struggled financially all of their lives. We had to live with my grandmother for a while, but we were, we got back on our feet. And when I say I went to those sweatshops every day after school to meet my mom, she wanted me there for a reason. She said, take advantage of an education so that you can do this. So my point is, when I think about worker safety, when I think about my mother, when I think about sweatshops and the ending of that, and what we need to do to safeguard that. These are issues. When I think about the child tax credit, imagine if my folks had the benefit of a child allowance, a child tax credit, where they could use that to help get back on their feet. So much of legislation is about your own personal experience, or the experience of people that you're in communication with. And so I had the opportunity from my own family experience. And then I fast forward to my work. I didn't come out of a legislative background, by the way. I never ran for office before I ran for the Congress. I had managed campaigns, lots of campaigns, and I managed Senator Dodd's first first Senate race, and he asked me to come to Washington as chief of staff. I don't have to tell you, I didn't know anything. I had been to Washington on my class trip. I knew nothing. So it was a very steep learning curve. But there, again, I watched a Senator Don and what my experience in relationship to that office and what we did, and I think about prescient he was so all those years ago on what we were doing for women and families, for kids, the Children's Caucus in the United States, bipartisan with Arlen Specter. I watched what he did with paid family and medical leave. It was not paid. It was the first one. It was unpaid, but he introduced that over and over and over again until it was finally signed into law, which gave me the sense, hey, if I can't get child tax credit this year or next year, you just keep going, which is the strength of the institution, by the way, that you can do that. Ending the war in El Salvador and Nicaragua, not afraid to stand up and buck your own administration, which is, or a Republican administration, when he spoke out against, the wars. And and so much of what I learned in that arena. And finally, when he left the Senate and I went to listen to his last speech, he said to his colleagues, it's not about me and you in this chamber. What we are about is the people outside this chamber, in our states, in our communities. So for me, it was just I learned about legislation clearly. I, had that experience, which allowed me to look at issues that I cared personally about, that I do now, that come out of my own experience, and that this institution gives you the opportunity to help to make that difference. And it's, I've been blessed, truly blessed with this job. It is transforming in people's lives. And our job is to push the edge of the envelope to make things happen. That's what my job is about. That's the way I characterize my job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you really a slightly related question. When I first came to Capitol Hill, it was 1975. At that time, there were 19 women in the House of Representatives.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Only one chaired a committee, and only caucus chair Patsy Mink was in the leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Today, there are 119 women, as you know, in the House,
Right.
7 committee chairs, and of course, the House is led by Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, in your experience, what you think, how has the rise in the power of female legislators changed the House?
Mm-hmm. I think it has been significant. Part of what I did in my career was to work for Emily's List to help elect Democratic pro-choice women.
Right.
And the crazy thing about that is I went to work, and I love Ellen Malcolm, and I was there just a short period of time, and then the position, it was an opportunity for me to run myself. And then I went to Ellen and I said, I think I'm going to run. And at the outset, Ellen was, you're going to leave. It's so, but then she said, what am I talking about? She said, that's what we do here, is we get women to run for office. But you're right. There are 7 women who are chairs, but there are 36 women who are subcommittee chairs of committees. So it is a profound difference. And for me, it's not just about the numbers and the way I describe it. I get asked by the press, isn't this a male-dominated institution? Give me a break. We're not in the majority, though this is, the numbers have really, catapulted. But what is critically important is the nature of the agenda. It is the agenda that gets formulated where women have made an unbelievable difference in creating this agenda. I go back to thinking about, God rest her soul, my colleague Louise Slaughter. I worked with Barbara Kennelly, with Nancy Johnson, with Marge Rockema and others. At the National Institutes of Health, there were no clinical trials in which women and minorities were included. So, Wendy, they extrapolated the research on men to women. We're physiologically different, you know, but the force of women at that juncture changed that. Today, women and minorities are part of the clinical trials. And we are now, we watch very vigilantly to make sure that, you know, all of, if they're going to do a study on the brain, well, and we spend all this money, how are women included in this? What are the differences? COVID had a different effect on men than women. So we made a really revolutionary change in healthcare. The agenda changes. Sexual assault, Violence Against Women Act.
Yeah.
You know, women there, but you had a Joe Biden at the time who was, you know, the leader of that pack. But you had, talk about Patsy Mink, Title IX. You look now with what we are looking at the agenda. How many, you guys tell me, you're so experienced at this. You think several years ago, we would be talking about paid family and medical leave? You think we would be talking about equal pay for equal work? No, these were fringe issues. Childcare. Oh, this is just about women, you know. No, they are now the center of our public discourse. And that is the role that women have played in changing the agenda, strengthening it. And I'm not saying that my male colleagues are not there. They are. But it sometimes didn't dawn on people that these were important issues. But as soon as they are, then we build a coalition. Because, you know, when I said the press says to me, you know, it's a male-dominated institution. Any legislative body, as you know, you have got to build a coalition. And not all of the women on both sides of the aisle think the same. You know, so you can't get there with just your votes. You got to get there by reaching out and bringing in the like-minded people who believe, as you do, that these are important issues. And that we can move forward on them. And that has happened. We have passed equal pay for equal work in the House now 3 times. It's gotten caught up in the Senate. I am hopeful that we can break that logjam in the Senate. We are now on the cusp. I'm waiting to see what we're talking about with paid family and medical leave. Part of that bill is the child care bill. Is a child care infrastructure, paid sick days. And these things affect women because women are in the caregiving. They play a double role. You know, they're in the workplace, but they also have, you know, if your kid gets sick, oftentimes, you know, a spouse, you know, pitches in or does that and so forth. But mostly it's the women who have that caregiving experience. Your parents get ill, you know, you're there. Anyway, it's the agenda. They change the nature of the agenda. And that's what's critically important about having women in the House and in the Senate.
So following up on that particular topic, when you think about the Senate, you think about, I think there are 25 now women in the Senate. I think 25 women in the Senate. And you think about crossing between the House and the Senate. And at the same time, you know, we're in a community where young people want what they want and they want it now, just as we did when we were their age. And they don't love the idea of compromise. They don't like the idea that you have to compromise to form a coalition. And, you know, even going back to breast cancer funding, we know that there wasn't even any authorized breast cancer funding until Barbara Mikulski jumped up and down.
That's right.
In the early 1990s. And but these are things that are taken for granted by people in their 20s and 30s and even you know, early 40s. So how do you, as a member of the Democratic Party and as a member of Congress, think about explaining this or teaching about what's necessary to get the job done across the finish line? For example, holding on to the House in 2022, or even just getting support on the Senate side. How do you get, how do you talk to the women there? What are the differences between being in the House and being in the Senate in terms of forming those coalitions?
Well, let me focus on the House for a second. I use myself as an example. I told you the child tax credit. I started the journey on the legislation for the child tax credit in 2003. In 1997, I introduced the pay equity. It's a very simple premise. Men and women in the same job deserve the same pay. Paid sick days, and really, God rest his soul, I introduced that with Teddy Kennedy, in the early 2000s. Paid family and medical leave, Kirsten Gillibrand in 2013. Schedules that work with Elizabeth Warren. Now, this is what I do try to explain, and it's hard because people do want to see the fruits of their labor, right away. And it may be the kind of experience that I had. As I say, I worked with Senator Dodd when, it was 8 years before there was a family and medical leave bill. Even President Bush vetoed the bill, but he hung in there. And so I try to talk to people about just saying that you have to understand the strength of the institution as well, because as I said, you can't keep introducing the legislation. The environment changes, the players change. There are new opportunities to make headway. And some will listen and some won't. It's just, depending on it. But that's the way I try to explain it, to people. It's not that I am so willing, you don't compromise your principles. You don't compromise your values, but you think strategically about what the end goal is. How do I go from A to B? What do I have to do to get there? Who do I have to enlist in this effort? And I think it comes with time, but you have to have a fundamental belief that it's worth the time, and the institution is worth the time. You can't just say that Congress doesn't work, it fails. It does no. It's the we have to make it work. We have to continue to make it work. And you build inside coalitions and you build outside coalitions to help to plead your case here, so forth. It's really an extraordinary opportunity, I think. Well, you guys know that, what we can do. So I hope. I think, a number, get it. It's so forth, and it's. I think people. Part of it has been such a long time when we have seen such robust investments in, on the big screen. I'm looking at, I just talked to you about the legislation. I look at the child tax credit. I'm looking at equal pay for equal work. I'm looking at paid family and medical leave. Do I want it all? Yes, I do want it all, because I wonder, again, as well as I do, maybe better than I do, the opportunities don't come back again. Yeah. They don't. When Chris Dodd passed family and medical leave was over 20, 25 years ago. It has now taken all that time for us to now deal with paid family leave. An assault weapons ban. We ended it, or we put a time frame on it. We've never been able to get back to that again. Childcare, you may know this. I had this wonderful opportunity to learn about Mary Norton, who served in the House, known as Battling Mary from New Jersey. I actually went to talk to John Dingell about her, a number of years ago. Battling Mary was a Second World War from 43 to 45, we had childcare centers all over the country. Why? Because women were in the workplace. Men were overseas fighting the war. As soon as 45 came, over, done. Today, we are fighting for childcare. So these things, that's why you want to seize the moment. That's why people want to try to seize the moment. And I get that. But I also, have learned that, my mom told me two things. My mom passed away 4 years ago at 103 years old. And I learned many, many things from her. But she said, don't take no for an answer and never give up. And so for me, that's,
Right.
those are my guideposts, so.
That's very
Well,
inspirational. Professor Arenberg is going to take he's going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the Q&A. So
Okay,
if people want to
fine.
put questions, in the Q&A chat now, they're welcome to do that.
Well, it's a good segue from what you were saying. And you mentioned earlier how razor thin the Democratic advantages in both houses. I mean, we're historically thin, really.
Mhm.
And yet we're talking about legislation that rivals the New Deal or the Johnson administration, which had much larger margins. So it's historically thin now. We have the congressional elections coming up next year. Historically, the president's party has a tough time in off-year elections. And of course, the Republicans once again have the upper hand in drawing congressional district lines. So, and already the gerrymandering has begun. So, how confident are you that Democrats can keep your majority in the House and improve on that to
Yeah.
strengthen the hand on this legislation in the future?
Well, a note on the margin, because I want to just mention, and actually the staff director of the Appropriations Committee, Robin Giuliano, is a Brown graduate. So I've got that's a beautiful mind here. But we passed 9 of the 12 appropriations bills on the House side, 9 of the 12.
Right.
At first, it started with a 4-vote margin, then it went down to 3. So threading that needle and being able to, that is what's necessary to do. With regard to the midterm elections, I'll be very short and sweet on that. If we deliver for the American people on those things that are making a difference, will make a difference in their lives, we will come back in the majority. I believe that. Because what I've watched is when I'm at home on the American Rescue Plan, where people say to me, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the child tax credit. Thank you for this. Thank you for that. Businesses, we wouldn't have survived without you. But that was, January.
Right.
We now get to next year. But if we can deliver on what are still the essentials for the economic security of the people of this country, we will come back in the majority. That's why this time is so important.
So that makes perfect sense. But I think just a quick follow-up on that would be, how do you package that? Is that going to be, I know Speaker Pelosi's one of her many talents is packaging a national message to an election. She did in 2006, she did in 2018, among other times. So how do you package that and then also counter a lot of the Republican efforts at the state level that could be considered anti-woman or anti-family? How do you engage that, or do you just let that go and say we delivered?
No, well, in terms of look, if people feel that they are going to get that monthly child allowance that is going to help them. Really, these are not my statistics. This is Columbia University statistics. We will lift 55% of children out of poverty. Staggering, if we can deal with universal pre-K, if we are looking at how we handle the student debt, these kinds of issues that affect people's lives. People are, as I have found, it's not the process. They don't know about breaking a filibuster. They don't want to know about it. It is about what is it that you are doing that will have an effect on me and my family. And that's, I mean, one of the messages that speakers always talks about is for the people. What we're doing is, putting money in people's pockets, shots in the arm, their health, their economy. And that can be, that can be packaged. What was the other part of your question, Wendy? I just forgot for a second.
No, so how do you counter the Republicans that sort of focus on the cost of all this when you're trying to talk about how it can help people? Because
if you do, if you're dealing with polling and you know where the public is, overwhelmingly, they want us to deal with the issue of healthcare, the high cost of healthcare, which is part of this reconciliation package, that no one should spend more than 8% of their income on healthcare, the cost of prescription drugs. If they see that we're doing something vis-a-vis the pharmaceutical industry to drive down the cost of prescription drugs, they are for that. Republicans are against it, but you got people who are, for looking at the whole issue of gun violence and what we ought to do with background checks. The public is very supportive of the agenda moving forward. And that's where, we have to, that's where we have to go. We can't, if they see the bickering back and forth, they say, well, there they go again. They just can't get along. Put that aside. Let's pass legislation that has a profound impact on people's lives, and then message it, talk about it, let people know what we have done, and make that connection. Then I think that's the way you try to do it. Now, obviously, you get into campaigns, there's a lot of negative stuff, that's different, but I'm just talking overall that I think we have the makings of a very, very substantial opportunity. Infrastructure will create jobs that cannot be outsourced. There's the climate issues, there's hunger and nutrition, there's all, did you watch during this pandemic? I'm sure you did. Look, I was at many places giving out the farm to food boxes to families who couldn't afford to put meals on the table. If you provide, if you're doing something with regard, if they're have to do food stamps, if you're recognizing that that's important and that we need to do that, that they will understand it. What helps themselves and their kids, what helps their own families is what we have to get to.
So on that note, in terms of partisanship and campaigning, we have a question. What was the political motivation for the Republicans to block the debt ceiling suspension? What do they gain politically in doing so?
Well, look, they have let me step back. I believe that the debt ceiling is a shared responsibility. It's not a Republican or Democratic issue. And to answer the person's question, I don't understand it. And I don't understand when I testified the first time I went to the Rules Committee on the first continuing resolution from the House. I explained what was in it. I also said that the debt limit had been attached. I heard from all of my colleagues, and I had heard beforehand, and which is why I didn't think, that's my own personal view, was not to attach the debt limit to the CR. But what I heard was that if the debt ceiling were not there, I can vote for this. There are good things in this bill. So tonight, only 34 Republicans. So it's politics. It is all about trying to score political points. The point of the debt ceiling, I have voted to increase the debt ceiling. I have voted 3 times, and I railed against the Trump tax cut. Richest 0.1% of the people in this country got the tax benefits. You know, corporations not paying their fair share of taxes. I railed against it. $2 trillion. I voted under Donald Trump to lift the debt ceiling. Did I support it? No,
Sure.
I didn't. But there's a responsibility in governing, and that's part of which I don't see the Republicans with this view of governing. It's wanting to get the power to win, but it's not about governing. There isn't one idea, one visionary piece of legislation that they have moved forward with. It is all negative and reactive. The debt ceiling says you pay for the debts that you have incurred. It has nothing to do with forward spending. They try to make that, you know, the 3.5 trillion, the spendthrift, et cetera. No, this is going back to the CARES packages. It's going back to the Trump tax cut. 97% of this debt is attributable to the Trump administration, 3% to the Biden administration. But they will continue. In fact, they just lie about it. It is misinformation about what the debt ceiling is, right, and what they want. I was stunned really tonight because I took them at their word. And I knew going into when we were there last week, and I said to my colleagues, if we attach the debt ceiling, we're not going to get Republican votes. They have said that, okay? And you know, that would mean that all the Democrats would need to vote, and they did. There was every Democrat voted for it. So I was really, frankly, stunned this evening when I looked up at the board, and I saw folks that I believed who told me to my face, if the debt ceiling were not there, I will vote for this. I could vote for this. There's so many good things in it. That was the word. So many good things. Why did we deal with the debt ceiling? So it is just pure politics and a way to try to muddy the waters and be antagonistic to the Biden administration.
Let me just interject a quick question there. Do we need a debt ceiling?
Well, I would look to the scholars. I think it's the 14th Amendment of the Constitution that says that, but I'm just paraphrasing, that in fact you don't need to have a debt ceiling. And I think that there are people who are looking into that. So I'll be guided by what the what the views are. But in some respects, it doesn't seem that we do need a debt ceiling. I guess it was Jerry Nadler who spoke the other day about minting a coin, and I don't know the details of this, but minting the coin in which you can use against the debt ceiling and so forth and so on. But so there are a lot of ideas, is what I'm saying, around this. And I don't propose, you need to get Nadler to talk about his view of this. You may not need to have a debt ceiling, but you can't play politics with it. You can't jeopardize the full faith and credit of the United States. You can't default. And you'll see that what happens with the markets. And that's what I hope, as this debate will be coming up, that the business community, the stock market people, and all of those folks will bring to bear. Because if you listen to Janet Yellen, who is terrific, it is catastrophe if that's what they do. And then, to Social Security checks, to people's 401ks, imagine what you do to people's lives. And that's not what government should be doing.
And just to add that under Donald Trump, they raised the debt ceiling. So, it's a hard argument to make.
You get his words. You can't hold the government hostage. It's about the full faith and credit of the United States. But, we also heard about Merrick Garland. I mean, so it's pure politics.
We have another question. You mentioned student loan forgiveness, and
Yes.
we have a listener who wants to know if that's serious in the House, and is it a priority for House Democrats?
Yeah, no, it is. Is it a priority? My own view is I'm very supportive of Elizabeth Warren. View is about, it's $50,000 and no tax liability. So yes, it is serious. It is very serious. Yeah, we understand, the burden we are placing on young people and what that means for the rest of their lives. So.
And then just to follow quickly on that, if you think about it, if you do that, which is clearly important because you don't want to handicap people for the rest of their lives in terms of their finances from student loan debt, but just under 40% of all Americans have any college at all, and 60% don't go to college. So what do you do in that conversation when you have student loan forgiveness, but what do you do for the people? And why don't the Democrats, maybe they are, support more vocational educational opportunities post high school?
We are truly all over that, and I'm going to speak. You're right. Most of the people in this country do not have a 4-year college degree. Nor it's wonderful if you can, but it's not a necessity for you to be able to succeed. We can realize your dreams and aspirations, but we can do that through, and I'm going to be very self-serving in this regard. What I've done in the Appropriations Committee, and I'd also talk about Bobby Scott in the Authorizing Committee. But what we've done is we include, I up the money in terms of the Department of Labor, $11.6 billion for employment and training, $3.1 billion workforce innovation, the Opportunity State grants, almost $100 million for migrant and seasonal workers, registered apprenticeship, an increase of $100 million for registered apprenticeships, and what the president had asked for as well. I am very, very strong proponent of internships, the accredited programs, look, I'll give you an example. Sikorsky, I represent, is in my district. They've got an internship program. It's for juniors and seniors on college. They work with Sikorsky. They go through the training, and they come out, and Sikorsky hires them. Same true of Platt Tech, which is a technical high school. So those kinds of programs, it reminds me when I used to listen to Secretary Riley and Secretary Reich talk about school to work. And they were very focused on these issues, and it rings true. I think we need to pay attention so that people without these college degrees understand that we value their talent and we want to provide them a way for getting good paying jobs. Look, I've got my own Gateway Community College is doing a program with water authorities. For the insurance companies are dealing with insurance adjusters. They're bringing in people, to do this. The Markle Foundation, I've worked with Zoe Baird in that context and the work that she is doing. There are so many great ideas. An electric boat in Groton, Connecticut. Whoa, pipeline to economic security.
For Rhode Island too.
Yes,
Rhode Island, yeah.
I know. We were there with, Secretary Raimondo and Marty Walsh, and she was talking about Rhode Island, what was going on, because, at the boat, you've got Rhode Island workers as well. Truly, when you say this, all over this is the future. And this is where we have to put our investments, Wendy, and, college training grants, Job Corps, all kinds of labor certifications for people. So, and what I would say on the education side of this, and I hope no one is offended, but I think we've got to get the for-profit community colleges and colleges out of this business. They don't provide any worthwhile grants to young people. They suck up all of the Pell Grant money, and it's been a disaster for young people in going to these places. And these are the issues that we need to work on.
Well, that's terrific to hear that you've done such
Yes.
big work on, because these are incredibly important programs. We have a follow-up question. I know you have to go, so we're gonna ask you this follow-up question. This is somebody quoting Professor Arenberg, so we better watch out. A follow-up question in Intro to American Politics. Richard Arenberg, our professor, has talked about the issue of the filibuster a lot. I believe his opinion is that he's opposed to eliminating it. I was wondering what your opinion is on abolishing the filibuster. Do you see it being on the Senate agenda in the future?
I'll speak for myself. I think we need to be rid of the filibuster. I think that we have a process that is holding up substantial public policy initiatives, which are beneficial to the people in this country. I don't know if, I think there are people in the Senate talking about, I think Norm Ornstein, who is terrific, and some members of the Senate have been speaking about how you might be able to revise the filibuster. I think one of the pieces is that whenever you had to have 41 senators have got to be on the floor at any time during this effort. So there is the sense of looking at what can be done with regard to the filibuster. And as I said, I think we need to be rid of the filibuster. So I just think it's become a process, it's become an impediment and of holding up legislation. And that I think, I think that's a real problem for us. In the context, let me just make one word about the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
If we do not deal with the Voting Rights Act, and I believe this sincerely, I think our democracy is at risk. I believe that in the last election. And that's why I worked as hard as I did to see Joe Biden and Kamala Harris elected. I think and I was in the chamber on January 6th and evacuated from the House chamber when it was an insurrection, the sole purpose was to overturn a legitimate election. That has never happened before in the United States. It happens in countries all over the world, not in the United States. I think the specter of that is still out there. And we now have states who are not only curtailing women's rights, but people's right to vote, suppressing the vote, and that has got to be done. And I think in the Senate, the only way to do it is to break the filibuster.
Well, I'm going to leave it to Professor Arenberg to close out this amazing discussion that we're very fortunate you agreed to record. So we have it live on YouTube, but we'll also have it on YouTube for people to watch, and we'll make sure to get it out there so everybody can hear it. I feel like you've covered 6 weeks of a 12-week semester when I teach Congress, so that's been really helpful for me. But I'm going to leave to Professor Arenberg to close out the conversation.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you. And thank you for what you are doing and really making political science and the Congress come alive into what it's doing. It's not, and it's part of, and I'm in a bipartisan way working with Tom Cole, Chris Coons, and John Cornyn on civic education, that civics secures democracy. That's the legislation that we have. So thank you for what you're doing, Professor Schiller. Thank you.
Just let me say for the record on the subject of the filibuster that although I don't favor eliminating the filibuster, I do support some of the proposals that have been put forward and put a number of those proposals forward in my book about the filibuster as well.
But you're both creatures of the Senate. When I talk to Chris Dodd, he talks about not eliminating the filibuster as well.
So, I was a House intern in the district and in DC in the House office, so I'm familiar with the House too.
Okay, good. Then you have the House perspective. Okay, thank you, Wendy. Anyway,
so Professor Arenberg, you want to close it out?
Close it out.
Well, as a closing question, I mean, you've been very eloquent on how it can take a very long time for issues to ripen in the Congress before, and you have to hang in there on them. And it brings to mind, looking all the way back to 1980 when I was working for Senator Paul Tsongas. He held the first Senate hearings on climate change, what we then call the greenhouse effect. Here we are 40 years later, and we haven't made very much progress at all. Are you still optimistic about the ability of our government to effectively meet this challenge? And what more can the federal government be doing?
Well, look, I am optimistic, and I might say our office, or Senator Dowd's office, was across the hall from Senator Tsongas's office, and Mike Naylor, who was worked with us, and his wife, and in the case, and Chris and Paul were good pals, and thank God. That's right. And when you say, what do you learn in these offices, and you learn that some of these people are visionary. They see where we can go, and Chris did that with kids' issues, etc. But I'm optimistic. I am, because there really is a very strong focus, and with newly elected members of Congress. You talked, Wendy, about younger people. They've come in with, climate. This is, the existential threat, which everyone quotes. But when you look at all of the appropriations bills have substantial programs, areas focused on climate and climate change. You look at what the president is talking about with electric vehicles, charging stations, cutting down on emissions. So I am optimistic that we can get there. Why? Because the climate, if you will, has changed from back in the 80s. The players changed, the environment changes, the countries go through unbelievable changes in itself, and it now becomes an issue that time has come. We met the moment. We're trying to meet the moment on some of these issues. And I think in terms of climate, we are, it is the moment that we can move forward. So I'm very positive and optimistic.
Well, thank you so much for this. It's a master class that you've given us.
Thank you.
And very generous with your time. And one of the unfortunate things about doing this on Zoom is that we can't see the standing ovation that I know you're getting from the audience.
God, well, I must come sometime. What David Cicilline keeps talking to me about coming, and so on. And you've got Dr. Jha at, my God, what a force. And what a force.
Yes, well, we would love to have you come to Brown, and we can set up a session in the near future when you get through the debt ceiling and the rest of the CR and the reconciliation package. But it's been a great honor and a great privilege to converse with you this evening. I really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you very, very much. I'll mention one other person who lived in our house for a while. She was an intern in this as Ilana Emanuel, and I served with her dad. But Ilana lived with us while she was an intern, and someone, and I think about how you help mold and really, give these young people, you open the vistas for them, you open their minds. And so it's really extraordinary what you do in academics. So thank you.